So in this part, what we want to try and do is just give you an overview of legal research involving case law. So how to locate cases, how to find the subsequent history of a case, noting up, we'll talk about that, and then finding some case references and the different tools that might help you. But just sort of a short introduction, I really do encourage you to go to the textbooks because they've taken an immense amount of time to really provide lots of examples, all in one place, to help guide you through those different activities. So there's means and costs, there's laying down the law, and there's the practical guide to legal research. So if you can find time to work through those, you will be much, much more informed. But of course, you know, really it's hands-on. You'll learn so much more by doing hands-on than ever just reading about it. It really is, all of this is a practical skill development that you need to become familiar with. So if it is all a bit daunting, then sort of law librarians are there to help you. There's plenty out there, so ask for help from people that you know to sort of guide you through some of those tasks. So one of the most challenging tasks is undoubtedly there's just so much out there. There are so many cases and so many jurisdictions, and it still always comes down to that very big question: is it still what we term good law? Is it still valid? Is it still appropriate to be using? And then importantly, and this is what you've got to start getting your head around as well, is that your search strategies will vary depending on the type of information being sought. Even though it's all in the case law environment, there are different strategies for, you know, depending on the nature of the question that is being asked. So it's important, I think this is again just a bit of a refresher, I won't go into any detail, but it's here for you to reference rather than having to go back and find out which week and which module was all of that in. Just the synopsis again about the rules of legal citation and AGLC 3. I was in a meeting today at the University of Queensland, and the manager responsible for the law library was there, and she said, "We get so many queries about AGLC 3 from students." So it's something you need to be really on top of so that you can help everybody else. You might remember this is a screenshot that we had way back at the beginning, which looked at the formula, if you like, for presenting the citation for case law. So, and you've got the two examples there with the round brackets and the square brackets. So if there's a volume number, it's in round brackets. If there is no volume number and the sort of actual location device is the year, the date, then that's going to be in square brackets. And there's a starting page for your case, but then you also have what we term pinpoint references as well, and they will be the page number where something is actually referenced or cited. So that's how you would work with those. So I'm sure you remember all of that from ages ago. And that's just again the same screenshot, which tells you the different elements that you need to be aware of as when you are using legal citation. And of course there's understanding how you speak the name of a case as well. So what looks like R.V. Smith is actually the Queen against Smith, and what looks like Donahue v. Stevenson is then Donahue and Stevenson. So you do need to sort of be able to say it as well as read it or write it, etc. So they're just there as reference to you. We also talked earlier in the program about medium neutral citation, and all unreported decisions these days have what we term medium neutral citation. So that gives you the names of the cases, the year, the court identifier, the judgment number. Okay, so they're not published in a bound volume the same way, so a page number as a starting point of the reference is not going to work. So you refer to the judgment number itself, the full date, and then if there is a pinpoint reference in the pagination within that document, then you can use that as well. So if you look at Jade, for example, and go to Jade Browser, there's an option there to browse through the resources. You can see at a very quick glance how the different jurisdictions have got exactly that model of presenting the citation for the different decisions coming from the various courts. So, and that again just explains it as well in a bit more detail, and where you can get further information in the AIJA guide if you need further bits and pieces. So the original, you will see some references to older materials, older unreported decisions, which are not in the format of the medium neutral citation. And these tend to have sort of a decision number. If you look at the very bottom line there, the Federal Court decision number, and it's a very long number of a number of digits. And so they are referred to quite often. You will see those in your legal research. So you just need to understand how they're constructed and where, what it all references as well. So those are the older ones. So just to touch here on what might you be asked to do around case law. What might you be asked to find? So there's a list there of 6 different search tasks which you might like to consider. So one might be finding case law on a particular subject. Okay, so you need to find out what has gone before the courts on a particular matter. And the search aids that you've got at your disposal there are digests and legal encyclopedias, and there are some indexes of sort of cases based on legislation, for example, things like that. So that might be a way to go. Finding the subsequent history of a case. So a case was handed down at a certain point. You want to find out whether it is still good law, whether it's been considered as part of that doctrine of precedent in further legal hearings across the different jurisdictions, etc. So here there's probably some new words for some of you here: citators, case-based, that you'll learn a lot about next week. First point, they're referred to as citators. So they give you a lot of information about the history of the case. Again, case digests, there are case annotations, and again, legal encyclopedias. So if you remember, sort of way back in Module 2, I think it was, we looked at secondary sources. This is where they really come into their own as supporting your searching, helping guide you through the jungle of legal resources to find exactly what you need. They do cost a lot of money, but the reason they do cost a lot of money is because of the intellectual work that goes into creating the content and publishing the content that is made available there. There may be some case notes, so those some notes discussing the details of the case, and again you can track those down through similar type of resources that are listed there. And sometimes you're asked to find a case reference, and that can be that way. It might be whether words and phrases have been there. There are, as we found out early on in the course, that there are dictionaries of words and phrases as secondary sources. They can be very helpful. But again, those digest legal encyclopedias, etc. So really try to find some time to look at the different ways you can work with those resources for different types of queries. If you are looking at whether statutes or regulations, delegated legislation, have been considered in any cases, then again you've got indexes and the annotators and all of those type of things, citators. So again, it really is a matter of looking at the resources and finding out how they work to do it. To say the practical side of all of this is going to be next week, and we'll make sure that you are introduced to a lot of these ideas, but also if you can do some preparation during the week, then you might have questions that you're able to put that will then help you do that in a bit more detail. If you have to find cases by subject, then you do need to understand the topic of the research inquiry, and this is where it's important that you understand the hierarchical system of common law, and that you want to look for cases which are at the higher authority. So the High Court case is the absolutely binding one. You don't want to necessarily deliver just something from the Magistrates Court when there has been a lot of activity around that type of topic area in the higher courts. So there's some really, as I said, the legal textbooks take you through these. There's practical walkthroughs, but also have a look at the online, when you do start looking at LexisNexis and Westlaw, etc. They've got really good help sections which are there to guide you as well. So it depends on your learning style how you want to sort of actually work through some of those things. But certainly finding a case about a certain topic or subject is a very common type of query. So then judicial consideration of an act. So this is where you want to know whether there's been a case relating to a particular section of an act, not normally the whole act. It's going to be broken down into the particular legal matter within that area of legislation. So you need to understand legislation, of course, but then you need to understand how that is then judicially considered. So on the Blackboard site for this week, under the read area, I've added, it's a couple of years old from Larissa Reed, who was with us the other day. She put together something around finding legislation judicially considered. So take a look at that as well. It won't have dated in any way. It'll all be quite relevant. So she'll take you through the tutorial type of activity she does in the New South Wales law courts in that area too. So that's obviously an important one. The next area we said was locating cases by words and phrases. So what disputes around the definition of words, for example, is there? And so you'll be able to find some cases. Very importantly, the same word might have a different understanding or interpretation in different pieces of legislation. So just because you find, oh, here we go, here's my word, and it means this, that may not be enough. You need to actually understand the immediate context, the immediate piece of legislation, and where that is. And again, the secondary sources are very, very helpful. The dictionaries of words and phrases, which would identify exactly those granular differences between the different pieces of legislation, and then the encyclopedias will provide some good discussion around it as well. So don't forget, of course, that the Act itself may have definitions which could be helpful around that. So yeah, there's quite a lot of work that you could be doing in that area. Of course, with this, don't forget that legislation changes all the time, so you need to check the currency of the resources that you are using in terms of secondary sources, whether they are absolutely current to today's date or whatever the date at the point of time was, but also that legislation, as it's amended, the section might have changed or it might have been repealed or whatever. So you need to look at that. To find out where the legislation is at that very point in time too. So sometimes you find acts are renumbered, so you need to double check whether the section number that you're trying to do some work around is exactly the same one. And sometimes, as we saw before, with our example around legislation, where an act gets renamed and then renamed again, or whatever, that you may need to run searches around the titles at the legislation at the different stages of its own evolution. So some of the resources for words and phrases, the main tools like LexisNexis AU, there is the electronic version of Australian legal words and phrases, the encyclopedias like Holsbury's, Australian Current Law. So have a look. You do have those resources that when you're in LexisNexis, you can directly select the different sources that you want to search on. You're not having to search across the whole huge amalgam of the different resources. And then in Westlaw, the encyclopedia, they've got Laws of Australia, and they've got the Australian Digest, the Legal Monthly Digest. A print resource for mainly sort of the Stroud's Judicial Dictionary of Words and Phrases. That's got the English angle of various things. But then the series of law reports as well can be helpful. Some of the old print ones have actually got subject indexes, which were always very useful as well, because they would guide you to sort of the actual cases that did discuss or cover words and phrases in different areas. And what about some of those unreported judgments? Again, as we said earlier, not everything is published, but they still may be cited by judges in later decisions. So there's a range of sources. The court websites we've already seen have got all their the decisions that are handed down in individual jurisdictions. But the other online databases are also quite helpful. So you need to get to look at some of those to see what they do contain and what they don't contain. So LexisNexis, Westlaw, Ostley, and then Barnett J is trying to coordinate a lot of things as well. So quite a range of resources that will lead you directly to the unreported decisions. Now, in part of all of this around the doctrine of precedence, you do need to find the subsequent history of the case. Okay, so a decision was handed down at a certain point of time, and then it can be considered favourably, or a later court might decide that it's an unfavourable direction to go in. So you need to understand whether the case that you've located is directly relevant to your matter, but also that the status has not been changed by later decisions. So what can happen is that the decision or parts of a decision, not necessarily the whole case, could be reversed on appeal, and you read about that in the press quite often, that it's the decision is reversed once there is an appeal. It can be overruled by a superior court. So remember that it's the hierarchy of the courts is really important. So you do need to check up on what they refer to as the precedential value of the case. And it's actually called noting up. You'll find reference to the term noting up. So this term, in the old days, when everything was just in print, there were physically marking up, noting up in the margins where references to later cases are referred to. So it's very, very messy indeed. But the citators do that work for you today, so nobody writes in the margins anymore. But a researcher, as a legal researcher, you do need to know if the decision has been overruled by the same court or a higher court, or whether it's favourably commented on by a later decision. So there's good treatment and bad treatment in terms of what might happen to a case further down the common law process. And here's lots of terminology for you to become familiar with. And again, the textbooks will provide more detail around what they actually mean. So you've got sort of fairly, I might term, neutral terminology around a case a decision might be considered, it might be discussed, or it might be referred to. Okay, so that's, let's say, fairly neutral. If it's followed, that means that it is binding. So it says, yes, we're following, the facts are pretty much the same, they are substantially the same, therefore the decision will be followed. Where a decision's been upheld on appeal, you have the term affirmed as well, so that's worth noting. And the other ones applied. So this, as you can see in the description there, the facts are actually materially different in that situation. And approved is where a court approves the previous decision of an inferior court, so it's gone up the hierarchy, but it approves what has been done. So they might also have some explanation around it, so explained. Now, distinguished indicates that the court decides it need not follow a previous decision because there is a salient difference between the different cases. And then there's some more negative type of things happening around doubted, disproved or dissented or criticised. So that's negative treatment of the original case that you're referred to. And then not followed means that both courts are of coordinate jurisdiction. So the latter court has no power to overrule it, but it's not necessarily bound to follow it either. So there's a difference of opinion around it in the cases. That's all really quite complex. So you do need to sort of understand how that plays out. Again, the databases are being a lot more helpful these days, and they have these signals in the way in which things are happening. So like traffic lights, you've got red, orange and green. So negative treatment is red, so it indicates that something has been, a case has been reversed, overruled or disapproved, for example. Cautionary is sort of that middle of the road, being distinguished, explained, not followed, questioned, etc. So there's more discussion, more debate around it. And then positive treatment, so the green is that's where a decision has been subsequently applied, approved, followed or affirmed. So you need to understand those different areas. The neutral treatment that we referred to as being considered or cited, discussed, referred to, etc., etc., is just a wavy line in the middle. And the very bottom one is that there's a link to a case-based entry, so for citation purposes and things like that. But there's only citation information available. So become familiar with those and make sure that you do understand how they relate to the subsequent treatment of a decision later down. So Westlaw, with their first point database, they've got some similar ones, which they refer to as flags as opposed to signals. So a red flag, again, is the negative. The yellow flag is caution, and see what's going on. The green one is there's citing reference. The H, it just sort of varies. It's, as you can see down below, affirmed or given leave to appeal has been granted, etc. So personally, I think that the LexisNexis ones are a little bit more clear. But again, have a look during the week about how this, and come ready with some questions to put to our speakers from LexisNexis and Westlaw so they can explain it. There'll also be help sheets on the database sites which will give you more guidance around all of those as well. So if you're looking for case notes particularly, then you're looking at the secondary sources. And so the purpose is really around trying to understand the wider significance of a case, so how it's discussed by the legal profession in general. They can provide commentary around the contextual background, which will help you evaluate, analyze the case in different ways. And sometimes the case notes will actually point to the need to have a change in the law. If you remember, we talked about the law reform commissions and how they can review an area of law where society might have changed and the legislation needs to be brought up to date in whatever way that might be. Case references, these are the ones we referred to early on about having almost like a nickname. So like the potato case, the Tasmanian Dams case are examples. Barnett Jade has actually got its own landing page for the Tasmanian Dams case, so it gives all the different transcripts. It's provided just almost like, we know you're going to be interested in this, and here you can get all of the resources. But of course then the preference will always be for the authorised reports. You can see both of those examples were major cases. Commonwealth law reports, which indicates that they were High Court decisions. So if you are doing legal research and you find that there is good law around and it's presented in the CLR and a Commonwealth law report, then you know that that is good law. That's the top of where it's gone. So the main tools that I would like you to have a look at. Case base is in LexisNexis, and First Point is in Westlaw. There's also Barnett Jade and then Ostley. But again, I refer you back to those tables that we've got in the week 2 materials, and I've provided a link through to that from the week 6. Go and have a look at those for your own particular jurisdiction, and look at the section in the tables around case law research so that you become familiar what is in your own jurisdiction. But having said that, I think our panel at the very beginning of the course, they sort of said how important it was to have your head around, have an understanding of all the different jurisdictions these days. It's not as compartmentalized as it might have been 15 or 20 years ago. You do need to understand all of them. So the greater familiarity you have across the different areas, the better it would be. And so there you go. There's just a bit more information around those secondary sources. The digest that we refer to that has short summaries of cases, so a little bit can help you focus. The citator gives you case references but really no other detailed information, whereas an annotator, it gives you notations on the history of the legislation and the case annotation, so where legislation has been judicially considered, the annotator can be very, very helpful. And then the legal encyclopedia is pretty comprehensive. It gives you the relationships between the case law and the legislation, and so you get a rounded discussion about the different aspects of it. So then we want to hand it over to you to get some practice. On the Blackboard site we've got some activities to help you understand, so going back to the structure of the different types of information that's contained in a case. There's an activity based around that. We've got an activity around finding a case using partial information. Very often, whoever's coming to you might have some of the information, may have inaccurate information, that sort of some bits of the citation they have are correct and others are not. So how to piece together the jigsaw puzzle there. And then also activity, trying to find cases which are basically a judicial consideration of legislation from there. And what we do want you to do is really get into the online legal research tools and have a play. There's no sort of totally right or wrong answers that we need to sort of desperately share with you. But if you do have any queries, then please just let us know if you're getting if you encounter any problems around that. But they are fairly straightforward, and the purpose of those activities are really just to get you used to working in the environment of case law. Then, of course, because I know next week's going to be a busy week with our guests, I just thought I'd touch on the assignment information to make sure that you feel comfortable with that. Legislation research is in part A, so assignment 2A. Please look at the assignment brief. It gives you some guidance there about it. The Blackboard site has got all the information. So there's, I think in the assignment, there's 5 different learning activities. So all we want you to do is submit your responses to 3 of those 5. You don't have to do all of them. And there are different areas of legislation, delegated legislation and various things, different jurisdictions. So you can do all of them, but you only have to submit 3 for the feedback purposes. The case law research, again, that's, sorry, that should say 2B in the middle. I copied and pasted, you see. So you need to here put responses to 4 of the exercises, the questions that are there. So those are case law research. But don't try to do that until you've had a real good play, and I'd say don't try to do those until after we've had the LexisNexis and Westlaw activities next week as well, because they'll be really guiding you quite nicely within some of those areas, so to illustrate how to go about them. So in terms of the assignment, what you need to submit then, this is again taken from the assignment brief, so read that. But because there's a choice, we want to know exactly which question you are answering, of course, so please put the text of the question that you're answering, and then your short answer, the actual answer. You might like to consider the area of law. So what we're here trying to do is look at the process, your thoughts, how you've gone about it. It isn't just, we only need to know the answer. What we're trying to do is get you to understand the journey that you're taking as you are undertaking the research. So we really want you to think about your search strategy. You know, did you use the secondary sources? Which resource did you use? How did you do it? So if you keep detailed notes for yourself, then it's easier for you in the future to say, oh yes, that's exactly the type of question I had from there. How did I go about doing that? So you can use, you know, these learning activities as resources for yourself in the future as well. So how did you structure your search? What were the terms you used? Were there sort of proximity operators you found that were really useful, or truncation? Just really sort of, you know, search skills 101, if you like. Importantly here, did you check with another online service? Do you have access to more than one? They're not identical in any way, so that you might, and as we found out, I think, at the beginning of the course again, our panel members have got preferred resources. They don't all go to the same thing for the same thing. So, but it's always very useful, and as you're learning especially, to be able to double check the way in which you've done the search and then compare it with another publisher as well. Did you find any discussion as well which would have helped inform your understanding and help you evaluate what you found to ensure whether it's right or not? In terms of that, this is just a quick snapshot from an assignment last year. So using tables, for example, try to organize your thoughts. So rather than just have a lot of narrative, in this one we've got the query, the search strategy, the citation, and where it's come from, and then the notes, so the actual how the search process has gone around it. So that's one way. There's another query there, finding sort of some legislation, sort of amendments, etc. And again, it was the process in one column and a screenshot. Feel free to use screenshots. You don't have to write it all out. If a picture, you know, replaces 1,000 words or whatever is worth 1,000 words. So think about the way that you best work with the materials and how you'd like to then present that. So it doesn't have to be all just written text. Tables, I think, are very helpful, which has probably confused you all. So hopefully you're not feeling too confused at the moment. Any questions around all of that? Anything that you feel you'd like to know more about? As I say, it really is an introduction that we'd then like you to sort of go out and explore and work through things yourself, because that's really, it is a very practical skill. We can talk forever about theory, but it doesn't cut the mustard until you actually go. So that's the point, as I say, the little exercises to get you started. And then the textbooks, I think, will give you some good illustrations. And if you can work through some of those prior to next week. So, yes, Maria, you've got a question. Shall I give you the microphone? Oops. No. You should have microphone access. Can you click on talk at the top?
Okay. I was just wondering about the assessment. Do we get any feedback, or how do we get the marks, or how do you communicate the marks to us? Thank you.
Yeah, we do give you feedback, yes. There's the criteria and reference assessment sheets, which we sort of review the quality of your work generally, but then there are sort of model answers as well that we can provide sort of after you've completed it and everything like that. So, but we do annotate, you know, the way in which that's why we like it to be presented quite clearly, so that it's easier for us. So there'll be annotations about what's worked well and what hasn't, and ideas where you might have done things a little bit differently, or where you might have overlooked a step or something like that. So yes, we do give you that feedback on the way through. And the first assignment, we're almost ready to get it all back to you. It's been really busy for everybody, so they've all been reviewed, but I want to double review them again so that before I send them back. So that'll be the next day or so. They'll be back. Hopefully tomorrow night I get them all done. So, does that help? Yep. That's good. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, no, it's thank you. Yeah, no, we wouldn't just leave you in the lurch like that. I promise you. So there we go. All right. Well, if there's no further sort of questions at this stage, for what, if you can get some time, I really encourage you to look at the exercises that we've put up there for you. Watch the tutorial videos on case base and first point. Look at some of the academic LibGuides, and then work through at least one of the legal research textbooks, whichever is the one that you're enjoying working with. And so there's a lot. Okay, even in this short space of time, we've covered a lot of territory. There is a lot to learn, so try and think carefully about the best ways for you, rather than sort of swamping yourself with too much. But look at the assignment questions as well, and then think about how you might be able to present them to keep track of your search strategies. And just practice as much as you can. Just explore, So use the newspaper, things that are being discussed in the newspaper, topics there. What was that? What commentary on the legislation do you expect? So you mean the actual legislation questions? It would be, I suppose, around the actual steps you've taken. You don't need to analyse the legislation. The questions are quite direct, I think. We're not looking for commentary per se, so it's understanding your search strategies as to how you were able to get the answer that you did, what search strategies you used to be able to get there. Okay, so it might be a bit of, let me just go back to that example there. So to find amendments to a certain section of an act, it was going to the Queensland legislation, browsing by title, then following the links and navigating to the annotations at the end of the end notes, etc., to be able to find things there. That one provides just a bit of discussion around some of the what was found. The strategy was the different ways of doing it. So, okay, hopefully that makes sense. So, but we don't want an essay. It's really just, making sure that you understand how you are looking for the different resources. If you want to do them in pairs, that's also free. If there's anybody else in your neighbourhood or anything where you'd like to do them in pairs, that's also fine, because you have to discuss it then. That's a useful way to make sure that you're all able to understand it. So next week we've got Lisa Sylvester from LexisNexis and Tia Friedland from Westlaw. And as I say, please just try and find a bit of time to explore the platforms while you've got access to them, etc. And those are the references at the very end as well. So 3 chapters. And also Terry's book that we've written, Terry Hutchinson, has got checklists. So that's almost a step-by-step approach, which some of you might find useful as well. So, but that's about it. So lots and lots of case law. So on that note, if there's nothing more, you've got early marks, you've got an extra 20 minutes to go and play. And I say, if there's anything that you specifically would like covered through LexisNexis because you've already started to explore some of those resources, make a list of them and we'll make sure that we'll get them answered for you. So it should be a nice way to go. Having said that, I should stress we're not going to use Blackboard Collaborate next week because we want them to share screens, and as we've pointed out, this is not the best way. We're going to be using a platform called Zoom, which is very intuitive, very easy, and ultra simple to share screens with. I tested it with Tia from Westlaw today, and she was very happy with it. And Kate and I are going to test tomorrow night to make sure that it's all absolutely fine. So then we will provide you with an announcement with Facebook, and also on the page, the actual Blackboard page, that we will give you the information around how to connect. It'll just be a simple URL that you click on, and it just launches an application which allows the software to access your audio, etc. Takes 2 seconds, so there's no massive download or anything like that. And then it's really, really easy to run. So, and it also has a record mechanism, etc., etc. So we'll do it. So just watch out. There will be notices coming through over the weekend, probably, about how to join us next week. And hopefully you will enjoy that. But as I say, sharing screens that way is just so much easier. So, and that's what we want them to do. So, okay. Well, good night to you all. Happy reading. Happy exploring, and we'll see you next week, but not here, but via Zoom. See you then. Okay, thank you everybody.